It's a great privilege to be here as the first trade union leader at this quite old institution, I heard, 1948. Well, you know, I don't want to brag, but LO is from 1898, so we are 50 years older, so I think we can compare a lot of things. But the trade union has always been very international, a global movement. We work a lot all around the world, and I will go back to that later on. But I think it's wise to start with a description of LO. LO, as you know, is a trade union for blue-collar workers, and we organize 14 members, and they organize about 1.5 million blue-collar workers in Sweden. And this is perhaps not that different from other countries. The biggest difference we have in Sweden compared with other countries is that also white-collar workers and academics are very highly trade unionized. So the density altogether of all adults in Sweden are about 70%. Actually, it's even nowadays even higher for white-collar workers and academics than it is for blue-collar workers. The Swedish model is, of course, dependent on high trade union density, and we have the highest density in the whole world. As you know, LO is mainly a negotiation organization for having negotiation with employers. But we are, as many of you know, we're also a very big hub for research in Sweden. We employ some of the best to help us and to advise us on things that we need to change in Sweden. We work very much with political action, and we work very much to influence public in Sweden. So I think we are quite well known. We have a lot of debates on very many subjects concerning our members. Like right now, we have a failure in the pension system in Sweden, where the seniors in Sweden are getting lower and lower pensions every year. It's a fantastic system with only one failure. Doesn't give any pension. So that is something we have been working very hard from LO the last couple of years. And now we are really close to have a new decision in Parliament to increase the amount you save for retirement every year. Because that is, of course, very valid for our members. My father was a glass worker for 52 years. He retired in 1987, and he had 72% of his former salary in pension. And today, if he worked 52 years, still a glass worker, he will only be covered by about 58% of his former salary. So obviously, there's a huge dramatic drop since 1987. And Sweden is actually much richer today than we were in 1987. So this is only political decisions, make the system very stable, but doesn't affect or being necessary amount to cover the good pension for our members. So that is one example of questions we are working, of course, always for our members, but in that we can't decide between the trade union and employers. So we very often need politics to fulfill the dreams for our members. I say right now we are in the beginning of negotiation. 2020, this spring, we will have about 3.5 million people in Sweden with new collective bargaining conditions. And right now it will be tough. In a couple of weeks you will see the trade unions shouting at employers and employers shouting against trade unionists. And that is quite natural. We are always fighting to have as much as we can out of production in companies. And obviously the employers are trying to do the opposite, to give profit to their owner. I mean, it's quite natural, but we are quite successful in our demands. Of course, we have so high density, and we are not afraid to go on strike if necessary. If it's needed, and obviously we have not very many strike days in Sweden. Main reason is that employers know that we have the possibility to go on strike forever. We have a very, very big strike funds, so I think we can close and give all our members full salary about 6 weeks. So we can actually close Sweden, and the employer know it, so they negotiate with us. But in the same time, We are dependent that the company is also working next autumn after a salary increase, so we always demand as much as we think the economy could handle. And this year we demand for 3% salary increase. If you earn more than 26,100 Swedish krona per month, you have your increase in percent, and if you earn less than 26,100, you have it in fixed amount, kronor. And of course at the same level as 26,100. So the lower you earn, your higher salary increase you will have in percent. But if you only take it in kronor for everybody, or in percent for everybody, obviously the richer will always gain more from salary increase than people with lower salary. This is actually something found out by the economist of LO in the early 1950s. And it's quite funny with that history. It was actually a problem that started after Second World War. And you never heard we had a problem in Sweden after Second World War. The economy was really booming after Second World War. And the reason was obvious. Rest of Europe were bombed down. They could not increase industrial production after demand after Second World War. Already in 1948, we had few workers in Sweden. We had a lack of workers in Sweden only 3 years after the war. So that was actually the first time when the Swedish Prime Minister went from Sweden to another country, in this case Italy, and met the president and imported workers from Italy. So we had a huge demand on workforce, and we imported workers from almost every European country in many, many years. And that was one of the reasons Sweden were so successful in 1940s, 50s and 60s. We had the booming year of Sweden was, as you know, after Second World War, where we took a lot of people out of poverty. But problem was that demand for more workers was so big. We saw in the early 1950s that salary increase could be almost as high as we demanded. As we said, we want to have 10% salary increase next year, much more than productivity growth and much more than inflation. So, of course, we could destroy our economy really, very rapidly. So they had a huge investigation at LO, so the LO Congress 1951. And they decided to, instead of making changes in Swedish economy in shocks, as in many countries, we decided to have something we call solidarisk wage message, or in Swedish, solidarisk lönepolitik, where we decided in the LO Congress 1951 every year to always increase the lower salary with more than average salary increase. Every year, raise the lowest salary more than average salary increase. And if you do that 1 year, play no difference. If you do 10 years, still not that big difference. But if you do that 50 or 60 or in our case 70 years, every year, every negotiation, you will find that employer can't afford workers for things that are not productive. So instead of losing jobs in shocks, we lose them every year when people go from things that are not economic valid, that could not succeed in the Swedish market or global market. So we can use that workforce higher up in the value scale. And that is actually why now I will start to have trade union poetry. In Sweden, we have the highest low salary in the world. That's trade union poetry, isn't it? We have the highest low salary in the world. But still, we are the 7th most competitive economy in the world. And why is that? And you can investigate it for years. And in the end, after 10 years in investigation, you will find it's because of flexibility, and actually because the unions and employers are very responsible to take care of faster and faster changes in economy, and the flexibility between one job to another job is extremely well functioned in Sweden compared with other countries. It's not a huge stigma in Sweden to lose your job. You will move on, and we will assist our members to move on to the next job. So that is the reason we could actually demand a salary increase of 3%. It's about the increase of inflation. We have a problem in Sweden with low inflation and productivity growth. So we will not hurt the economy, and we will have more or less one of the highest salary increase in our part of the world. And this is, by the way, also valid for all the Nordic countries. We have more similarity in the economy. Both Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland have more or less the same economic model, and actually all of us is top 12 on competitiveness in the world. So the model is not only working in Sweden, it's working in all countries that try it. But we also want to increase pensions, and I told you earlier on this is a huge problem for LO members, and one of the reasons it's a big problem is that we don't start to save for our pensions until we are 25, and that was a compromise many years ago. So the advantage blue-collar workers have, that they start to work very early on, is not included in pensions because they will not pay in until they are 25. And actually it's valid also for many of you here working, or when you worked when you were younger. Our demand is that we should start to pay to retirement fund from day one. Whatever job you are doing, even if you're 18, 19, 20, 21, you will pay 4.5% to the retirement fund. And as you save it so early on in life, it means a lot of money when you're older. So in average, it's 2,500 Swedish kronor per month for our members if we can succeed with this in the round of negotiation. We also have demands on, you of course heard about Me Too, and Me Too also affected our members very much. Some sectors, most often in women-dominated sectors, about every sixth member had sexual harassment at workplace last year. So we also demand better protection and better protection for women in workforce. And we also have some demands for better rehabilitation. So this is a typical year of negotiation between us and the employer. And it, of course, will be tough. And as you probably remember, we always protect our together. We have a collective protection between our 14 members. So I doubt the industry won't meet the 3% salary increase, but in hotel and restaurants, in commercial sector, they will never agree on having a salary increase of, let's say, 850 krona per month. So in the end, they will take all the hotels into a threat of strike in 6 weeks or so. And then our solidarity between the 14 members is the one who actually give us the possibility to increase the lower salary most. And that is actually that Metal Workers Union are saying that we will close Volvo if you won't have the same salary increase for people working in hotels and restaurants. And that is a very well functioning model we have in Sweden, which the employer hate very much. They want to make changes in law so we can't have sympathy strikes for other groups. But obviously that will be very difficult to have a decision in Parliament, and it's actually also by the United Nations and ILO. We signed the ILO core conventions that we actually could go on strike whenever we want and how we don't want to do it. So I would say that trade unions in Sweden is a quite successful story over 100 years. We always tried to solve problems with employer or in society together with employer. And I will guess that we will have more and more important tasks to solve the coming years. And this is an observation I think both we and the employers are doing, that unfortunately Swedish politics and the Swedish Parliament is a little bit lacking behind because of problem with Sweden Democrats. Not Sweden Democrats as such, but when Sweden Democrats are between conservative or more left-oriented parties, nothing will be done in the Swedish Parliament. So there are no new big reforms. There are no new solutions that could find the consensus in Parliament, and that puts the light on us to solve a lot of problems. So last years, We have negotiated new things in Swedish society that we never thought we would be doing ourselves. For instance, when we had a huge immigration 2013, 14, and 15, we noticed that a lot of people from other countries were coming here with quite good skills. But in Sweden, before we changed, you were regarded a refugee with the same long process before coming to workforce as everybody else, even though you had a degree or a doctor or architecture or for that case, a chef. So we decided, we were asked by the Swedish government in August 2015 to try to solve and negotiate something we call fast track. So you go directly out and be a part of the workforce in your own language, and always do then together with someone that could interpret things in your workplace together with you. And this was in end of August, and the first agreement was made by one of our members. It was for chefs. We lack about 15,000 chefs in Sweden. So the first agreement we made for fast track were chefs, where you could go out directly working at a chef position in a restaurant or in a hotel. We allowed that you could wear Arabic or English speaking, so we always had a tutor that could actually help the people only talking Arabic. And up today, I think we signed 23 or 24 negotiations on fast track. One end chefs, other end doctors. Obviously, if you're a doctor, you have a degree from, let's say, Syria. You can not be a doctor in Sweden directly, but you can go together with a Swedish doctor and learn the Swedish way of healthcare and hospitals much faster than staying 5 years in a refugee camp before you're accepted. So we try to be more close between people coming here until we actually are in workforce. So in just a few years, we changed from an average of 9 years before half the cohort were in the workforce to 4.5 years. So that was a demand that actually we also lack of a lot of workers in Sweden. We, as you know, 100,000 positions that we couldn't find people to. But we solved that in just a couple of months. And now this summer, if European Union are saying okay, we will do that also for people without skills. A 2-year apprenticeship where you work for collective bargaining agreed salary, and you have a 50% subsidy from the Swedish state. So it's a 3-part negotiation between trade union employers and the Swedish state, and give assistance for immigrants to directly go out and work. In 2 years, you can learn a Swedish work for instance, a metal worker or the paper industry that lack a lot of people in Sweden, and after 2 years you are automatically permanent employed at a place and you regarded as full paid. But we don't know. European Union are still watching and seeing if this is support to a Swedish company that is not legal in European system. I guess we will win, but this could be a possibility for people with low skill to also come much faster into workforce. And then what we are supposed to talk more about, global cooperation, and you're right, the Swedish Trade Union always worked also very much globally, and it was actually global trade unions that financed Swedish trade unions in the late 1800s. We were very poor. Sweden was a very poor, one of Europe's poorest country the year 1900, so we needed a lot of support. So especially the Latin America trade unions supported Swedish trade union to form with finances and with expertise in the late 1800s. Today, obviously, it's opposite, but the same global connection between trade unions have been working for more than 100 years. And I'm the deputy president of the global organization called ITUC, International Trade Union Confederation, and we try to work with helping and assisting workers worldwide. It's really, really a tough job. It's super tough, especially for a group called Migrant Workers. A worker coming from one country, working in another country. It's very, very big in, for instance, the Gulf states, in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, etc. And you've probably seen the reports about mishandling of people, refugees, poor people from Nepal coming to work, for instance, in Qatar. average salary of $171 per month, with very, very bad working conditions, with an ancient system called kafala, where in practice when you arrive into Qatar, the owner of workforce are taking your passport and all your rights directly at the airport and then put them into camps where people actually die. One of the most common reason for people to die is because they don't drink enough working in 40, 50 degrees heat. So we had, in just 1 month, we had 174 casualties. Of course, the employer did not tell people from Nepal, you need to drink more than 1 liter per hour when you work in the construction sector if you work when it's 50 degrees outside. So it's really, really super bad. So we started a campaign 5 years ago, and we actually started a campaign when it was decided that Qatar would have the World Championship in football in 2022. And we made an assumption that about 4,000 to 5,000 people will die because we want to look at football. And obviously this was an enormous backlash for Qatar, that everybody's talk about not the football, but the problem for workforce in Qatar 2022. So I'm invited to Davos every year as a trade union. I don't know why they invite 6 trade union leaders and 2,500 CEO of companies. So I always say bring them on, and the debates are starting. But I had an argument with one of the princes of Qatar in CNN, where he was really, I tried really to embarrass him a lot. And I was really successful, and he was really embarrassed afterward. And last month, the General Secretary of ITUC were invited to Qatar, and this spring they will take the decision to ban and end the kafala system of Qatar and give everybody the right to go back to the home countries they want to, and to negotiate a living wage for everybody working in Qatar. So it will mean about double their income, and it will mean that they will have better housing, and it will mean they have a protection at workplace. So global work really is a success story. We were from Swedish LO, we've been working quite much in Asia and quite much in Southern Africa. Southern Africa is quite tough to work in. So we have a program since middle of the 80s called PANAF in 18 African countries, where we try to educate trade union leaders through study circle methodology that we had here in Sweden, very much in the Swedish trade union movement originally, because it's very cheap and you can have mass education. So every year we educate about 75,000 trade union leaders in the Pan-African countries, 18 countries in Southern Africa. And I guess we are one of the most influential of trade unions in Africa today, from the Swedish, and that's a cooperation also between LO and TCO and SACO. So it's all 3 confederations working with that project. And I just give you another example. Cambodia, big supplier on garment of textile. A lot of Swedish companies are working in Cambodia, and it's really super cheap to buy textile from Cambodia. The average income when we started this campaign were a little less than $90 per month. So also in Cambodia, which actually is an economy growing very fast, they have an annual growth of over 10%. So they are now a mid-income country. We demanded that they would increase the minimum wage from $90 to $176 per month. That's the level we call living wage, not only that you could support your family, but you can live a good life and pay all your meals and your children to school, etc. And the government were, of course, saying, no, this is impossible, destroy all Cambodia, as they say also in Sweden. But in the end, we made that campaign together with, for instance, from Sweden with H&M. So we made it together with 9 international brands, big textile companies, that actually saw that we can't pay as low as $90. And they promised Cambodia They won't move from Cambodia to a cheaper country if they increase minimum wage to 176. We are not there yet, but we increased from $90 to $165. So we're really close to living wage in Cambodia. And finally, I will bring you the story, a quite funny story, and how difficult it is for big companies to be banned in media. And this was also a case of H&M. Probably they are actually quite good company. I will argue that H&M are spending more than any other Swedish company on increased salary and making good values of their workers worldwide. They spend a lot of money. Just in Cambodia, they have 9 people working full time to control that none of their factories are treating the workers bad, and they are paying the minimum wage. So they're spending a lot of money. And of course, the reason is they don't want to be banned in Swedish media because they have child labor, etc. This is a story from Bangladesh, and perhaps some of you remember, they had a terrible accident in Bangladesh. It was a factory that collapsed, and about 1,100 workers were killed in that collapse of the factory. And we said that we need to have an accord. We need to have documents saying that it's okay for the state and for the trade unions to go to all workplaces and see so they are working with solid construction and good health and safety for the workers. And obviously the companies were saying no, and we tried to negotiate that in Stockholm, quite big, quite long from Bangladesh. And in the end, we had to. We wrote the article that we were supposed to have in the Dagens Nyheter, Swedish Daily News, showing that for H&M that if you don't sign this agreement, we will tomorrow tell you about how you treat workers in Bangladesh. And in the afternoon, we had a call from H&M and saying, okay, we are signing the contract, the so-called Bangladesh Accord. And now 175 international brands have signed the Bangladesh Accord and changing the garment industry in the whole country. So this is a way that we need to work very, very much with. I think we have an look at Mats. Our international department is about 10 or 11 people working full time, assisting us at ELO to work with international cooperation in other countries. And I will also actually argue that this is more needed than ever. Of course, globalization and production in the world have changed so rapidly last 30, 40 years. Most of the world were closed until early 1990s. So for instance, the whole development of China started after 1990. There is a good side of this. I guess you have talked about this a lot in your organization, that about 1.5 billion people have gone from poverty to mid-income because of this globalization last 30, 40 years. So it's a huge success for the world that we have taken so many people from actual poverty to mid-income worldwide. China perhaps the best example, but now followed up by India and a lot of countries where development have been really rapid. But there's another side of the coin, and it's of course not all employers are good employers, and this gives a good possibility for corrupt, bad employers to actually always try to find the lowest price for everything. So very often it's a competition between countries to be cheaper than their neighbors. And if you start that development, and especially in Asia, we have still hundreds of millions of people working poor. They work full-time, but they could not support their families, and they have a very, very, very tough life. And the working hours are, I mean, it's just unbelievable how many hours people are working. And one of the most common deaths in Chinese Chinese workforce is actually people killing themselves. Of course, they can't bear the pressure they have from the instance from Apple that are buying all the parts to the older telephones from China. They had about 1,500 people that took suicide working in their plants. And now, of course, we have solid work together with Apple to make better living conditions. And Samsung, one of the biggest employer in the world, have a lot of disgracing activity, especially in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, some parts of India, also Vietnam, that we then try to work very, very hard from Swedish Trade Union and from the Global Trade Union to balance. So we hope always that we could increase trade union power over companies, but it's really tough because we are dependent on only one income. It's the income from our members. We are 100% paid by member dues, so we have no state finance for our activities. So we need always to raise money for also all our global work through our own organizations. And as you can understand, it's not many countries that have as rich trade unions as in Sweden. So it's always a quite big battle. And the global companies, they have become so big, they can actually choose if they want to pay taxes, or they can choose if they want to be registered in a country, or some of them are not registered at all. I saw European Union are trying to solve the problem with huge tech companies, Google, Facebook, etc., and want to enforce a global tax on the new big giants. And I just saw the figure last week, it was measured by European Union, that if they can make that, and it's really a small tax, it will increase tax revenues from tech companies with more than 1,000 billion euro a year. So it's an enormous amount of money that they can today go outside of the taxation system, and they pay how less and how they can pay how much they want, but they don't want to pay so much, so gives people and countries big economic problems. France is very active on this, and they tried now this autumn to enforce a tax on Google and Facebook in France, but was immediately met by Donald Trump, saying if you enforce that tax, we will have 100% tax on champagne, on French cheese and some other things. And obviously, if we start to ban taxes and have tax on every product between Europe and United States, we are really in a bad situation, especially Sweden that are so export dependent. So just give you some figures about this, the problems we are facing in the global field. We see about every year about 2.3 million work-related deaths in workplaces. So it's a huge problem worldwide. And even in our part of the world, as you know, in Sweden, about 50 workers are killed in workplace every year, but compared with other countries is, as you understand, very low. But still 2.3 million work-related deaths every year. And about 310 million non-fatal accidents very often lead to disabilities for our members, and very often only quite cheap protection they could more or less, I'd say half that problem if you have good protection, especially in construction sector. We have about 160 million work-related illness. That's also a growing problem. As we in the European countries banned a lot of chemicals, especially chemicals that are, we know, related to cancer, still in the world, they are very often then moved to countries with lower regulation on the materials. For instance, Isocyanate, I don't know the English name of that, unfortunately. It's from car industry, where we banned everything in Sweden, and it's now vanished. A lot of producers then move them to other countries. Still, about 200 million in the world are unemployed, and then it's not accounted people working outside or in informal sector. And as you know, in many countries, informal sector could be 80 to 90% of all work in a country, especially in Southern Africa. This is a huge problem. So we think that everybody is like Sweden, but 80% of the world's population doesn't have any social protection at all. So we can't compare Sweden or the Nordic or the European countries or economies in any way. So will we succeed with this struggle against employer and globalization? I'm very optimistic, even though, of course, it's super tough. But I guess the good economic growth in most Asian countries will bring also better living conditions for workers. We've seen that all over the world, where increase and the economies become more stable, we will have actually we will see also better living conditions for workers. For South Korea, for a very long time, a really poor country, more or less same economic development as North Korea. But today, obviously, with a huge GDP per capita, also workers and ordinary people of South Korea are quite well paid. Or Brazil, fantastic years with President Lula, who decided to spend most of his 8 years as a president on trying to avoid starvation among children. Started a fantastic program where he actually took 50 million people out of poverty in just 8 years. Also, the story behind that is it's so brilliant. He realized he could not give the support for families through municipalities. Because when the money came to the municipality, it all vanished because of corruption. So instead, he handed out a plastic card, a bank card, to every mother in Brazil. And you have two amounts of money. One amount if children were proved to be in school. You had a higher amount, quite much higher, but all families could have money from to a plastic card individually to the individual, not from municipality or not to authorities there where the money could vanish. So he actually in 8 years took 50 million people out of poverty. He, by the way, were employed by Scania in Sweden, so he had known very much about the Swedish trade union movement and were also regarded as the president that took most people out of poverty in just a few years. But now he has been imprisoned because of corruption. We don't know if it's true, but the conservative of Brazil actually have put him into prison. I think it's now released, but it brings hope that you can change if you really want to do it. So finally, we will have a lot of time for questions. Are the trade union something for the past or something for the future? The question again. A lot of people said that the trade unions in Sweden would disappear already in the 1970s. But we managed to survive quite good in the 18, 19, and actually also today. I think the reason for the Nordic Swedish trade union success story compared with others is that we have high trade union density. And with high trade union density come also a view on trade union work that are quite pragmatic. We are not going on strikes every now and then. We are not trying to frighten our members of being too radical. We are trying to solve members' problems in day-to-day life. Just give you one example. I guess most of you will be affected by this in this room. We saw that the need of going from one job to another increased from the crisis in the 1990s. And then we started negotiating with the employer. We said, well, this is a problem for you, as you need to have more layoffs in the 1990s. You remember we lost a lot of jobs. And it's a big problem for us, of course. That's our member security. That's their salaries. So we started a program called TSL. We took 0.3% of all our salaries. We increased that in a salary round of negotiation. We took 0.3 of our own salaries. So it's our money, the workers' money. And we put that into a joint fund with the employer called TSL in our case, and TRR if you're academic or a member of TCO, white-collar worker or academic. So every individual in Sweden that are in risk of losing their job, all of them, have automatically an amount from our system, from the TSL system. And last year, 2019, we managed to help over 90% of everybody that had notice of losing their job to find a new job or education before they got unemployed. I think that is a good example why people say, well, I don't trust this Karl-Petter Thorwaldsson, he's a big, boring guy from LO. But TSL is quite good, and I think they have unemployment benefits that actually is quite important for me. So we give them quite good reason to be members of trade unions. So I guess this type of trade unions, quite pragmatic trade unions, that works mostly with negotiation, but also with political influence through the Social Democratic Party in our case, but for TSO and Sakonot, they are political independent. I think that type of trade unions has a quite good chance. And we actually see more people in the world going into trade unions than are leaving trade unions. And especially nowadays, trade unions are growing, actually in Africa, quite rapidly. A lot of people are going into formal sector, and a lot of them become members of trade unions. So I guess, and nowadays, we don't work against the World Bank and IMF. 20 or 30 years ago, they said, well, the first thing you need to do if you want to have money from our fund is to get rid of all the trade unions. Story of Latin America. Because the trade unions, they are bad, and they will not negotiate the lower salary, etc., with World Bank recipe for everything. Structural change and salary cuts. All over the world, they try to enforce their model. Nowadays, it's opposite. World Bank, IMF, OECD are saying the most important thing of economic development in the future is that countries have strong trade unions. And what is the change? Yeah, I think the failure of neoliberalism, that you give like 90% of the growth to the 10% richest, that we tried since 1990s. In the end, the big companies, they don't have any consumers, so nobody could afford their products. So in the end, actually, we've seen that the economic growth in the world have gone down. And now OECD, IMF, World Bank are saying one of the reasons we are doing worse now than before is because we are putting so much resources into a small group of rich instead of having more income inequality. So they actually say that Sweden, if we had the same income inequality as 1990, our growth and our GDP would be about 9% bigger than it is today. So now we don't have World Bank, OECD, and IMF on the opposite side. We are working together through big organizations. So I think we will remain. I think we will become stronger, and I think you will all be members in a couple of years. So thank you very much.
I'm wondering about LO's future politically, now when social democrats in Europe are gradually shrinking more and more, and Swedish Democrats are taking more and more blue-collar workers into their party, so to say. What will become of the political cooperation between LO and the political parties of Sweden?
That's a very tough question. Please move to next. No, no, it's really a difficult question for LO. The model of cooperation with the Social Democratic Party and LO was actually from the founder. It was from the start. Of course, it was trade unions that started the Social Democratic Party 1889. So first 10 years, the Social Democratic Party were a political party and a confederation for trade unions. But after 10 years, they said, we can't be both. So actually, the Social Democrats were starting LO. So trade unions started Social Democrats, Social Democratic Party started LO. And this has been a very good marriage. We have been fighting a lot, but we have also succeeded to go further on. And as you perhaps know, I'm also a member of the executive committee of the Social Democratic Party since 1890, not me individual, but since 1898. But you're totally right that we have a problem amongst blue-collar workers worldwide. And it's, we see that a lot of blue-collar workers are now listening to xenophobia ideas and nationalistic ideas. And that is most of the big changes you've seen the last 10 years in the world is from that group. So if you watch the figures behind Brexit, it's more or less exactly the same question as we are facing here in Sweden. A lot of people thought that they are not on the gravy train, they are not on board on a good life, and they are very, very frightened by migration, and that immigrants are taking welfare, mostly welfare, away from themselves. And it's also very convenient to point finger on another problem than yourself when you're not having a life that you wanted to have. So. And we have been spending a lot of money to investigate what happened. And this is a little bit long, but I think you will find it interesting in the end. First, we have a political problem, and it's called triangulation in politics. It is that all the political parties are looking for the same voter in the middle of the political scale. So everybody in Sweden wants to win. Typical, now I could change to say, people living in Blockhouse in Uppsala, quite well educated, mid-income taker. That is the dream of all political parties to win. That we always say Nacka, of course, most of the leadership of the Social Democratic Party always lived in Nacka. But obviously the Conservative or the Liberals or Center Party are looking for exactly the same group. When you decided for that strategy, then you start to ask people, what is the most important question for you? And if you're looking for the same person, you will have the same answer. So all of a sudden, all the political parties are then going through the middle. And when the middle and the political are regarded as failure, where should the voters go? If all the political parties have more or less the same solutions for every problem, where should they go? So before 1980, 1990, when you did not like your political leaders in the country, if you were right, you went to the left, and if you were left, you went to the right. I mean, democratic idea since 100 years. But since early 1990s, we see a massive tendency in the world that if you don't like what's happening in your country, you will go to the more extreme parties outside of this triangulated scale of politics today. So that is, I think, also a reason why, for instance, Labour Party in Great Britain, even though I love Corbyn and everything he says, obviously he's not quite easy man to vote for. He's really super radical. And if you elect persons like that, I guess, also United States and the Democratic Party right now, I guess they are in the tendency of elect a candidate that will be very, very, very tough to vote for because they are too extreme in ordinary American voters' eyes. So, so what is our solution? We think the best solution for Sweden is to have less income inequality, to give more and more people in Sweden a view that your life will be better, that we can't solve all your problems, but we can have a society that are solving the problem you're talking about. Better schools for our children, better and easier to have a first flat. I know it's a huge problem for young people. Solve ordinary people's daily business. I think they will have a second look at the political parties. Will we succeed with that? I don't know. Right now, I'm really confused about politics in Sweden, and as you know, we from LO have been really criticizing the so-called January agreement between the Liberal Center and Social Democratic and Green Party. Of course, I mean, why spend another 6 billion on the richest in Sweden when we have big problem in the municipalities or in the regions? Can't see the point with giving people earning more than 700,000 a year big tax decrease from 1st of January instead of spending on, for instance, universities. Why not? More better universities. So I'm very optimistic. I think we win. But I think it will be really tough before we start winning again. Longest question, longest answer ever.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for a really interesting lecture. You talked a lot about strikes and how that can be like a tool for the workers' movement. Yeah. And quite recently, well, another type of strikes, the climate strikes, and Greta Thunberg asked the workers' movement to join in to actually be forced in the Fridays for Future movement as well. Yeah. But you declined, and I was interested in the reason for that, and your views on the climate crisis.
Two very good questions. First of all, we were not we were actually very serious when we asked, and we had a meeting with Fridays for Future. They came to LO, and they asked us to have a strike in workforce at the end of September. And we took it to our board, and I was sure about the answer before I have the question to our 14 members. But and this is key for us. We are selling peace. That is the only thing I can sell. Peace and stability is the only thing that Swedish workforce are selling to the employers. And that is a guarantee for employers in Sweden that when they sign the collective bargaining agreement with us, they know they will have peace until next time we are negotiating. If we start to use the strike, the weapon, for other questions, they would not sign good collective bargaining agreements with me this spring. So that is we can't use it for other purposes than for increasing our members' daily life. So we met with Fridays for Future, and then they asked us, well, why don't you do anything? And then I started to describe what we are doing. We are super active in the big projects. For instance, Hybrid. Perhaps you heard about a new way of making steel in Luleå. Fantastic development with three of our bigger companies, SSAB, LKAB, and Vattenfall, where they in just a couple of years will take away the process we had for more than 1,000 years to make steel is to use coal, and it's massive carbon dioxide emissions from steel industry. Actually, it's 11% of all carbon dioxide emission in Sweden. So we are very involved in that. We have managed together with the companies to have an investment from the state of about 500 million, but they are spending now 40 billion Swedish krona in 30 years to make this change. And we will have the first carbon-free steel in the world, and will sell as hell. So we have a lot of jobs in the future with its environmental friendly steel. We are involved in Cementa, and cement industry is one of the bigger polluters, about 7% of our carbon emissions. And it's, in that case, it's actually just making limestone into cement must have carbon dioxide. It's a process that we can't stop with as in Hybrid. But we are making those negotiations with the Norwegian state to borrow some of their own oil and gas holes and push CO2 down to the below the zero, and we can take away about 90% of the emissions from Cementa. So we are involved in a lot of projects from trade union. And then one of the leaders, Greta was in New York, so one of the leaders of said, she looked at me and said, "You are so fucking bad." And I said, why do you think I'm so bad? You know, I've never heard that trade unions in Sweden were so involved in how can you be so bad of telling anybody what you're doing? So, okay, I was a little bit embarrassed, and probably she was right. No, we say that there are no jobs on a dead planet. We have been very active last, I would say, 10 years. But we actually had a great success in Paris, and perhaps you've not heard about it. In the parable of the Paris Agreement, we enforced part of the program called Just Transition. And this is obviously for workforce worldwide. When going from one type of industry to a new one, a lot of people will lose their job. For instance, Poland it's not the Polish political leaders are not stupid. They know coal is bad. But 100,000 people in Poland are working in the coal field, and a lot more are dependent on the income of coal from the coal field of Poland. So obviously the political parties and political leaders of Poland will say, we will not agree with the European Union that we should end all carbon emissions to 2050. So Just Transition is a fund where we assist this transformation from one economy to another. And we just made an agreement in Spain. They had 3, not as big as in Poland, but there are 3 coal mines in Spain. And we made that to 3-part negotiation, trade unions, employers, and the Spanish state, to assist all the workers in the Spanish coal industry, to assist them to a new job in another sector. So now they are closing the Spanish coal industry very rapidly through negotiation. So, and we are trying to help also from Swedish Trade Union, try to assist trade unions in other countries to start their own just transition projects. It will be tough, but today this is the only fun political areas of all. All the other are really boring, because nothing are happening. But here, lot of investment, lot of energy, and lot of possibilities for Sweden. This could be our really success story. And I think we can make it to about 2035 to 2040. First country in the world carbon dioxide neutral. That will be fantastic. Before I even die. Yeah, amazing. I'm not in charge. I promise not to be in charge of.
We had, like in the 1980s, in the 1900s, and now in Spain, there is some experiments with unions owning and running corporations, like a Mondragon corporation, for example. Is there a place for that kind of business, and how come it's like in Sweden, there's not like the unions aren't. How come this is not a more common thing on other places than Spain?
Well, actually, it's a little bit of a myth. The Swedish, you can say the Swedish model of cooperatives has been going close to the trade unions since late 1800s. And that is actually a quite big sector in Sweden compared with other countries, but it's not so well known, and we never make a point of it. Again, like Greta Thunberg told us about environmental friendly, but for instance, housing sector were done 50 years ago. All new apartments in Sweden were more or less built by mutuels or by cooperative organizations like HSB and Riksbyggen. And I'm president of the biggest insurance company in Sweden, Folksam, that have a fantastic development, I must say that. So now it's actually a little bit of a myth. But I give you right as well, because I don't know when, but sometime they decided to go the other way. And together with the employers, we are now perhaps the biggest capital owner of Sweden. And we invest heavily in industry, new development in Sweden. I guess together with employer, only for blue-collar workers, I think the pension funds is about 2,500 billion Swedish kronor. And we invest that, for instance, a couple of years ago, Fortum, a Finnish company, wanted to sell the power grid of middle Sweden to, and we learned that a Chinese company wanted to buy the Swedish power grids, and we don't want to have Chinese owner of Swedish power grids. So we bought it from Fortum for 60.1 billion Swedish kronor. So huge investments, and we are actually also helping relatively startups to, like we were the first big investor in Spotify, and we are now the biggest investor in Northvolt. We make the battery for electric cars in Skellefteå. So we own a lot of things but not through direct ownership of companies. And we had some in the 70s as well, when they closed down, for my region, glass factories. A couple of them were bought by the glass workers themselves and continued. And 2 of the glass factories are actually still owned by the workers themselves. Skruvs glasbruk and Målerås glasbruk, if you want to buy really good red colored glass from worker-owned factories. So we have some, but you're right, in other countries it's bigger, but we own it through stocks in the companies.
My question is similar to your first question. Don't you think that LO has more in common to the left party than to the Social Democrats nowadays?
Well, if politics were a second, yes. And I know left party also, they will very often see what we are saying from LO and say the exact same a couple of days later. And actually we decided a little over a year ago in the board of LO that we should start a cooperation with left party to avoid that all opinion building on politics in Sweden are in the center or center right. Of course, when the Social Democrats are making a new government with Center Party and Liberal Party, the debates will be from there to the right. Nothing will happen to the left. So for the first time ever, we invited Jonas Sjöstedt to the board of LO. It was a really bizarre meeting, but interesting. And I was also on a bizarre meeting for Left Party in Gothenburg and met the activists in Left Party. And we have also a lot of seminars to try to have a better discussion on politics in the future. So we are doing a little bit of that. Then I doubt the trade union cooperation, the LO cooperation with the Social Democrats will vanish very quickly. We've grown up together, and Stefan was my boss for 12 years at Metal Workers Union, and now I try to be his boss as president of LO. It's not so successful all the way, but I doubt that will vanish so fast. But in the same time, you're right that if you could go take questions right now in the second, yes, we have right now more questions similar with the left party. But it's not that quick fix.
I have an interest in improvements of working environments in Sweden. I actually from Japan, where we have to work so long time in a day.
Yeah.
And actually Sweden is quite famous in Japan as a country where people have a really good working environment. So I want to ask you whether there is an argument in the law, whether there is still a demand for a better working environment in Sweden in the point of like gender equality, working hours, or like careers or leave.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't know if you know that we work very close to the Japanese trade union movement called Rengo. So we have a lot of cooperation with Rengo, and I was invited twice to go there and talk for their congress. Really very different from Sweden experience. There everything is super sharp. If it's 9 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock. So they could not go to Uppsala University. They will die in 15 minutes. And please help the others to understand. You know the world where people actually dying in the offices. I can't remember. They told me that you have a Japanese word for. Can you say it? Karawasi. Yes, thank you. Actually, it's a fact in Japan. It's about 130 casualties a year, where people actually they die at workplace because there's so big pressure on the working hours and they could not go home before the boss, etc. So it's a lot of traditions in Japan that is really needed to change rapidly. And also female participation in workforce is really super crucial for Japanese economy. Of course, no immigration and a rapidly decrease of population makes the demand of workforce in Japan more than probably all around the world. So yes, you're right. It's also a big debate in Sweden. And I would say in Sweden, the biggest problem we have in the workplace is so big difference between male-dominated working life and female-dominated workplaces. Still huge differences where my constructing, my builders, my metal workers, all my male-dominated branches have fantastic working hours. They have fantastic development. They can decide over their own time. They have flexibility, 71 hours a year, where they could decide if they want to have early Fridays or if they want to have 2 weeks or more vacation. They have in their collective bargaining agreements rights that no women-dominated branch have in Sweden. So that is, I would say, an increased debate also in Sweden. How could we help and assist female-dominated, like municipalities, hotels and restaurants, where a lot of, especially younger women, are working for much less money and much less power than men are doing in their workplaces. So this is a big debate, and we have also there, of course, problems for older people working in elder care centers with problem with backs for very heavy jobs, very long working hours, and a lot of employers try to divide workers' working hours. You work in the morning, then you're free 3-4 hours in the middle of the day, and then you work nights. Very convenient for employer, but for the individual, always a woman, will then work from, let's say, 8 in the morning to 8 in the night. So if they are mothers and fathers or mothers, they could not stay home with their families. On the same time, compare with others, of course, a fantastic system. Especially, I would say, 2 things that have been key for Sweden is when you made childcare for everybody in the 1970s. That was a fantastic opportunity for families to have a combination of work life and family life. And secondly, parental leave system. There is an amazing development since 1970s where you can stay home with 90% of your salary first 13 months. And so compare with other countries, I think Sweden is still a paradise, but we have a lot of problems to fix also here. All right.
Thanks. I want to ask you about the solidarity amongst the union movement.
Yeah.
Because you talked about how the union movement has been successful in bringing up the bottom faster than the middle. And so you're able to extract a fair share of national income from employers. But how does it work within the union movement? How are you able to convince the high-paid workers to moderate their wage claims to help the lower workforce? Particularly in this more individualistic age, we probably don't explicitly talk about the solidarity. What's in it for them, or how do you convince, like the metal workers, for example, to go along with that?
I don't know. Well, I guess they won't be shamed by LO. So if I say to Swedish media that metal workers in Sweden are only thinking about themselves and they will not support female-dominated areas, they will have big problems amongst their members. It's relatively easy to have solidarity between our different members. The problem is when we want to increase one group over another. For instance, then we have since 2007, we have tried to decrease the gap between female and male salaries. So we are working very, very hard with that. But that's okay for all members. But if we want to say that if you work in the municipal sector, you should have more close to the industrial sector, then they start to get mad. We want to tell our members you are well paid if you are a metal worker or a constructor or whatever. So that relative incomes increase over others, that is tough. But for instance, in this case, we gave this. I told you when I started, we'll give the lowest paid read female sectors, about 0.5% better salary increase than men. That's okay. And we have individual members. Every rounds of negotiation, there is always a stubborn employer saying, everybody else could have 1,742 kroner, but not in my sector. The other 13 will go on sympathy strikes with them. Amazing story. I was just new president of LO when all had 1,742 kroner increase, but not the musicians. And that is our smallest member, only 2,800 members of musicians trade union. So the president of musicians trade union were coming to the LO board and said, well, you know, Swedish radio and Swedish television, they won't give us the same amount as everybody else. And then in the room, the electrician trade union said, well, give me a couple of hours. And they took all the electricians for Swedish radio and Swedish television in strike, saying, starting tomorrow, we will take everybody out. We close Swedish television, Swedish radio. And 2 hours later, they had 742. I was really, that night, very happy. And last time it was hotels and restaurants. And they actually, the employer said, no, you will not have the same increase because we are a service industry and we can't have the same salaries as everybody else. And we were supposed to put about 50 hotels into strike. And the employer first sounded quite okay. But then the other 13 members, they said, we will close down a nuclear power plant, we closed down Volvo and a mine. And in a couple of hours, they also had the same salary increase. So that is actually working. So, and that is when you're really proud to be LO president. Strikes is good, but we never use it. No. Strike is actually best before you need to use it. Threat of strike is much better than strike. Good advice for future.
I think those words are very appropriate as our final word.
Oh no, strikes are good.
Well, I don't know. A big thank you again for coming, Karl-Petter Thorwaldsson.
Thank you very much.